introduce us and we'll get this started.
All right. Hi, I am Renee Stillings from the School of Russian and Asian Studies. We've been organizing study abroad in the post-Soviet space for nearly 25 years now. And we started expanding first into Ukraine and through Ukraine further south into Georgia several years ago. And currently have two programs that are fairly active in that region. One we regularly offer during the semester of policy and conflict studies in the region. Another were foodways, focusing heavily on the food culture of Georgia. I'm here with Michael Denner, professor of Russian at Stetson University, who has just co-authored a cookbook on primarily the vegetarian or vegan recipes from Georgia, which we'll learn a little bit more about as well. And he's going to share his experience being introduced and falling in love with Georgia. And then we'll speak with Gela Turabelidze, who's, I would say, a heritage Georgian. He has grown up in Ukraine. His company, with whom we work to provide programming in the region, teaches Russian and takes our students as well through the Caucasus. And he'll tell a little bit about his experience of growing up, I would say, as a heritage Georgian, but really introducing himself in a much broader sense much later in life. Go ahead, Michael. I will be introducing us to Georgia.
I think I heard this story first in Batumi with Gela, this fellow Johnny Baramidze, who's an excellent cook and nice hat, and he's done a couple cookbooks for Georgia. And I think this was really the first day I spent in Georgia. And so this was maybe 2014 or so. So there's a toast, like, so supra, this word supra, which people should understand, it sort of is a party. Georgians like to have parties, and you have a supra at all important occasions. And a supra is really nothing more than tables and tables of great Georgian food, lots of wine, and a tamadan, a toastmaster who tells toasts, tells stories, and is basically responsible for the party going successfully. And so there are really famous tamadans, and everybody wants to get the best tamadan to come to their wedding party. So this is a story. Johnny was our tamadan for this supra that this instantaneous supra that we put together in Batumi back in 2014. And he told this story, and I'll probably get it wrong, but it's a great way to understand Georgia and the country that is Georgia. So this takes place a long time ago, tens of thousands of years ago, and there's Yahweh. God has created the earth, and he looks about on the seventh day and he says, all of this is good. Today I'm going to divvy up the world to all of the denizens and all the people, and make sure that they have a proper place. And so if you think of Yahweh, he's a CEO, and CEOs only know how to do one thing, which is to run meetings. And so he calls a meeting, and he gets all of the people that he's created that week together, and he says, I'm going to apportion the world now. And he gives, he gives France to the French and Germany to the Germans. God knows who he gives in North America to South America. He's divvying up China to the Chinese. And then he realized, he looks around and he's like, the Georgians. Where are the Georgians? And he kind of hears some plates clinking and some laughter and some song. And he goes, the Georgians. And so you got to imagine Yahweh, he's huge, like he's a monster, right? He's stomping across the earth. And he's like, boom, boom. And he finds the Georgians, and the Georgians are doing what the Georgians always do. They're partying. They're drinking their wine. They're singing. They're humming songs. They're making toast. They're eating this delicious food. And like Georgians are very hospitable people. They're like, oh, hey, Yahweh. We forgot, as Gela knows, Georgians don't really respect clocks and calendars. GMT, Georgian maybe time, which means that if you say, let's meet tomorrow at 6 p.m., probably we'll meet tomorrow sometime after 6. Anyway, so Yahweh, so the Georgians look up and they're like, oh man, we forgot your meeting, Yahweh. It's okay. Come join us, have a drink, have some food, sing some songs, and you'll feel better. And so Yahweh, Yahweh's a pretty polite guy. And so he sits down and he starts to eat. And the food is so great. It's unlike anything else he's ever tried. I mean, he drinks some wine and it's amazing. It's turbid. It's slightly sweet. It tastes unlike anything he's ever had before. And he starts to sing with the Georgians these droning, sad songs, and he does the Georgian dances that are so well known. And Yahweh completely and totally forgets himself, and he's with the Georgians for days, partying and drinking. And at the end of it, he stands up, and Yahweh's had a few bottles of wine, and he stands up. Thank you for gathering with me today. You missed the meeting where I apportioned all of the earth to all of the peoples, but I kept one place. It's not a big land, but it's covered with beautiful mountains, and it's rimmed with the Black Sea, and it's incredibly prosperous. It's a wonderful place to have a garden and fruit trees and to grow grapes. And I kept this land for myself and myself alone. And I'll give it to you, my Georgian friends. And that is how Georgians came to live in the country of Georgia during the first supra. Anyway, you sort of get an idea of a lot of things here about Georgia. One, you get the idea that Georgian food and Georgian wine and Georgian dancing and Georgian music is utterly unlike any music, dancing, food, or wine that you've ever had. You also get an idea of the incredible hospitality, openness of Georgians, and you also get a sense of Georgian identity and the way that it's wrought up entirely with the foods they eat and the music that they sing and the dances that they dance, and the agriculture that they pursue. So all of this, and this is a classic toast at a Georgian supra. And as I'm saying, like 10 more words about Georgia. I could talk about Georgia for a long time, but I think a lot of people don't even know where. I have two screens, and so excuse me here. There we go. So a lot of people don't even know where Georgia is or what it looks like. So first of all, I should say that the reason that it's called Georgia is complicated. The Georgians, the endonym, the name of Georgia that the Georgians use is Sakartvelo. But that's also the name of the language, as is the case. Often there's a close identification with those people who speak Georgian are Georgian. So you see here Georgia, if you can see this map, I don't know, but Georgia is this wedge-shaped country. It's not very large. It's about the size of West Virginia, so it's quite small, and it's wedge-shaped. And on the west side of it, it is basically entirely bordered by the Black Sea, and on the north, almost the entirety of Georgia is bordered by Russia. But then to the south, it shares a border with Turkey, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. So that's where it's located. It's neither. You'll notice that it's in a kind of a questionable spot. Like, is that Europe? Is that Asia? And this is constantly a question that is asked about Georgia. And I feel like it's a European country. It's a Christian country. It's had orthodoxy since the 4th century. And it's been part of the Western world. Fascinatingly, it adopted Christianity so early that it sent a representative to the Nicene Council in the 5th century. So at the very beginning of what we would recognize as organized Christian liturgy and a sense of commonality among Christians. That's what the Nicene Council really was. The Georgians were already Christian, and they sent a bishop. Now, of course, that bishop was probably Greek and probably self-identified as Greek, but that's complicated, so we won't go into that. But so Georgia has long roots in what is obviously Europe, but at the same time, it has been ruled successively by the Persians and the Turks, so it has a foot in Asia as well. I just want to point out, I love this topographical map, and then I'll actually stop talking about Georgia. And I think it's one of the things that people have to understand about Georgia is that it's a mountainous country. You have to think of it almost like a funnel or something, and you have a very flat plain that goes from Poti through Kutaisi and basically ends in Gori. And this is this very, very flat valley area that is then rimmed on both sides by the Caucasus, the major Caucasus to the north and the minor Caucasus to the south. And then as you go west, as you go towards Tel Aviv and Azerbaijan, it grows progressively drier. So you have to sort of like imagine in the United States going west towards places like Colorado, Arizona. So you start off in like Virginia in the Far East with the Black Sea, with lots of humidity and rain and warm temperatures, and it's very flat. And as you go farther and farther east, it becomes more and more mountainous and drier. But here's the thing. The Caucasus are, after the Altai Mountains, the highest mountains in the world. They're very, very new. They're very, very steep. And so you've got this range that goes along the north from east to west of the Greater Caucasus. And then you have what really isn't a chain of mountains, but people call it a chain of mountains, the Minor Caucasus and the bottom that really take root in Armenia. So and I'll end now, like, think about this, these incredibly high mountains and this incredibly flat valley that goes to the middle of the country. One, you have an amazing diversity, a heterogeneity of ecosystems. You have mountains, you have basically what is a desert in the far east of Georgia, and what is basically a subtropical area in the far east of Georgia. And in the middle, it's forested. And here's the deal. If you have high mountains and a valley, everyone automatically should think rivers. And what is perhaps for me the most striking thing about Georgia is the number of rivers that country has, and the way that it's sort of defined by its rivers in a way that the American East is as well. So it often, Gela and I have both had this experience where you're standing at a point someplace in Georgia that's flat, and you spin around, and everywhere you look, there are mountains, and the tops of the mountains are coming rivers. And it's like that combination of flat, grassy plains and high, steep mountains that are capped with ice, snow all along. Parts of Georgia mountains aren't opened up until July, amazingly enough. So combine that with just rivers and water everywhere, and that is what Georgia is like physically. And now I'll stop. Yeah. Tell us your story.
Yeah, you can talk for hours, Mike, because you've been to Georgia several times. You're just sharing your experience. This is really important to share your experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
A sense of place.
You know, I would say that, my story it's a long story because, I was born in the Soviet Union. I'm 49 now, and I was born, and it was still Soviet Union. And I had that experience when I was a kid, traveling to see my father's family to Georgia each year. And then I have this new experience when I started going back to Georgia back in the 2000s. So it's two different types of experience. So, but I would say that doesn't matter what you study, what your subject studies are. It's a really good case study, Georgia, for anything. If you study history, there's a lot of history. It's the second oldest Christian culture in the world. And apart from Christianity, there was Islam. There was a huge Jewish community living in Georgia until recently. So you can talk about religion, and then if you talk about language, Georgian language is unique. It's it's still hard to find the roots of the language. And it was there was some influence from other languages, but historically it's a totally unique language. Yeah. And then Georgian language has its own unique writing system, which is very nice looking, I would say. These round letters, and so you want to learn a language because the language has these beautiful writings. So and I would say that my experience, like as a kid, was different to my experience as an adult because I was raised in a mixed household. My mother's Ukrainian, my father's Georgian, so they would speak Russian at home. So I was brought up in the Russian-speaking household. And then when I was a kid, it was a very hard language to learn. And my parents, they didn't really think much about me learning the Georgian. Each time I would go to Georgia, I would speak Russian to my family. And you don't really feel that you belong to the culture when you don't speak a language, their language. So then back in 2007, I traveled after a long break, maybe 17 years. I traveled back to Georgia and started my Georgian studies, and now I feel comfortable. So each time I go to Georgia, I socialize in Georgian with my friends, and I watch Georgian television here in Ukraine, and I travel, I talk to people in Georgian, so I feel comfortable. But as I said, the language is really hard to learn, and specifically the verb system, because in my case, Georgian is my eighth language, and I would say this is the hardest language to learn because unlike European languages, the case system is different, the tense system is different, vocabulary is very, very complex. So, but the language, the challenge is the most interesting thing about learning languages, because when the language is simple to learn, it's not that exciting, I would say. And once we started running programs with Michael and Renee in Georgia, I've been, I don't know, maybe 40 times to Georgia, traveling with students to various places. And I would say that I've been to like most of places where like 95% of locals never been to. Yeah. Because the roads are, in some places because of roads, and other places because of other things. But Georgia, as you said, it's like pretty much the size of West Virginia. But you can drive across West Virginia and you won't see much a difference. So if you travel across Georgia, yeah. So here's desert, here are mountains, here you have the most fertile valley, and then you see the Black Sea, and then all around you are surrounded by mountains. So the geography is very diverse. And
I should break in and say what's astonishing about Georgia is that you can start the day in Tbilisi, and in 2 or 3 hours be at David Gareji on the far eastern side of Georgia, on the border with Azerbaijan, which is this incredibly beautiful arid place that has absolutely nothing in common with Tbilisi. Or you can travel east, and in a few hours, 5-6 hours tops, you can be in Batumi, which is on the Black Sea. There are black mountains that run directly into the sea at Batumi, like in Hawaii or something. So like these two places, they're separated by a few hundred miles, literally. So Georgia is like, that's one of the things that I can still never get over about Georgia, is how incredibly small the country is, but how much is crammed into that one country. It's astonishing. By the way, I threw up another. I think maybe you can see it. So I love shifting maps, and so the first map that I showed you, the geopolitical map that I saw you had Georgia and Europe in it, and it made Georgia look like it was really part of Europe and Russia. And now I just want to show the other side of southwestern Asia, what we would call the Middle East. And you suddenly realize why it's geopolitically so important to the United States. It's right across from Iran, Turkmenistan, Iraq, Syria, from Georgia, it is a matter of a few hours to get to those countries, which is why there's such a large U.S. military presence in Georgia and why the Georgians are such fast friends with the United States. I often say that Georgia is the most pro-American place in the world. It's probably more pro-American than America. Things might change, but that has always been my impression about Georgia. They love Americans, and as soon as they learn that you're from America, it's just they're delighted.
I want to just interject a little bit while we're on the topic of geography and how geography really forms a nation and its identity. And I think that this is one aspect that it's important to understand is that due to this very mountainous terrain, we have a situation of groups within Georgia with distinct cultures, perhaps language differences. The food, the hachapuri in one region will be different from the hachapuri in another region. And then this is quite important to understand the nature of Georgia, just how much the mountains break things up. And this is something studied, the nature of east to west and north to south in terms of mountain climates and climate zones and how information flows. And sort of related to that, and I have to kind of credit this explanation to my colleague Josh Wilson, is this idea that why is it that all of these things that we all love about Georgia, starting with the food that almost becomes cult-like in a way, and why is it so unknown? Other foods, other cultures have traveled the globe much more widely. And a point he made was that Georgia was neither an empire that sought to expand its culture to other places, nor has it been resource wealthy in terms of exporting its goods to bring back something else. And that's left it as a very isolated pocket. But within that isolation, you have so many different groups. Gela, you might be able to speak more to this differences of the various pockets across Georgia.
Yeah, I would say that apart from geography, climate, and food, the most important aspect about Georgia is its people, because I would say that the Georgian mentality is quite unique, and in terms of hospitality, and every foreigner coming to Georgia feels at home, because the tradition, the culture of Georgian has been like that for centuries, thousands of years. And since Georgia is surrounded by other countries, it's located on the crossroads of civilizations, and it's partly in Europe, partly in Asia. You can say that way. As you said, as you put it, Michael, once, it's a balcony of Europe.
Yeah, balcony of Europe.
Balcony of Europe. Because mentality is somehow European and geography is kind of European. So it's right on the border between Asia and Europe. But mentality is still European with some special flair, I would say, some special Georgian character. And I think this is the most important thing about Georgia. And when we take students to Georgia, it's very important to open up Georgian mentality, to introduce to the people, spend time together, listen to their stories. Because as a tourist, you can see some beautiful places, but to get to know the country, you have to spend time with locals, and then find out from these locals their stories, their family stories. And then the more you know, the more you fall in love with Georgia, and you would like to come back again and again. So, and I would one more thing I would mention: Georgia was on the Silk Road, from China to Europe, and I would say there's a mixture of cultures in Georgia, historically, mixture of cultures. Because the Tbilisi in the Soviet times, Tbilisi was one of the most multi-ethnic cities.
Yeah.
As far as I remember, like over 60 ethnicities used to live in Tbilisi. So I guess it's because every ethnicity feels comfortable living in Georgia. Of course, there are some like issues and questions, but overall, it's a very comfortable place to live for any ethnicity.
I think you're right. So
Be-
let me just we have to close this out, and let me talk. We have a few more minutes. Let me just say, I'm just sitting here thinking and listening to Gela and about the importance of geography, and Renee about isolation. And Renee, you're right. You know, it's wrong even to talk about Georgia before around 1800, at which point it was literally incorporated into Russia. It became like Russia. So unlike places like Poland or Ukraine that had a secondary empire government, Georgia just became part of Russia. And Georgia really didn't become one country until the Soviet Union. And even then, you could meaningfully talk about, it's not until after World War II that Georgia has a sense of Georgia as a single entity rather than a bunch of ethnic groups. That's not to say that they didn't get along or anything, or that there was a fractured state, but that the notion of a Georgia doesn't really appear until the 20th century. So let me listening to all of this, and I just was thinking, like, you could tell the story of Georgia in many respects with the three main ingredients of Georgian cuisine. So let me try to do this. I should have thought this through. But like, what's weird is if I told you the three, like, what for me are the defining ingredients for Georgian cuisine, you would be like, what, really? And those three for me speak a lot about Georgia. The first ingredient that I think defines Georgian cuisine is probably walnuts. And by the way, walnuts are sort of a acidified hazelnut. So the real nut of Georgia, historically speaking, has been hazelnuts, but now mostly people eat walnuts, and they think of walnuts, even Georgians. So, but this sort of betrays this deep connection between Georgians and the land. I mean, walnuts and hazelnuts are gathered in the forest, and to this day, if you have a vineyard or a tea plantation, you don't cut down the walnut trees, because walnut trees are like holy. Why would you do that? They're beautiful trees. You can do so many useful things with them, and plus they make walnuts. So walnuts. So Georgians eat walnuts in everything. The second ingredient is corn, what Europeans call maize, and that's kind of a strange thing. But like every food that you're served in Georgia probably has maize in it. Machadi and gomi, but everything else. And of course, corn was introduced by was introduced from the New World. It's a South American, probably Mexican crop, but it was it's grown there, and it's such a part of Georgian cuisine and culture that I think I'm right in saying that Georgians think they invented corn. And when you try to explain to them that it's actually from Mexico, they're like, oh no, you've got your history all wrong. It's actually from Georgia. And here's the reason I think. And you're like, you just don't have those fights. And then the third ingredient that sort of defines the Georgian experience for me is probably wine. And the wine in Georgia, the Soviets always loved Georgia. Ukrainians and Soviets always loved Georgian wine, but the Georgians sort of joke, and they're like, they only sent the worst stuff to Georgia and to Russia and Ukraine, and they kept the good stuff for themselves. And to this day, if you try to buy Georgian wine outside of Georgia, it's very good. I don't want to say anything bad about it, but it's not at all the wine that Georgians drink. And just to throw out, there's 405 actively grown varieties of grape grown in viniculture in Georgia. Now, if you think about that, a country that's basically the size of West Virginia, and then you compare that to a country like France, which is 10 times larger than Georgia, and probably at any given moment, there are maybe 35 or 40 different varietals grown in all of France, and that's at the outside. I would probably say that 10 varietals in France account for 95% of the output of wine in France. But then you compare that to Georgia, and then the last thing, which is so interesting to me, and then I'll stop. Georgia never experienced phylloxera. So people don't know wine history, but phylloxera was it's a fungal disease spread by thrips, by little biting insects. It originated in the United States, and then it was exported to Europe. And at the beginning of the 20th century, from about 1905 until the First World War, basically every grape bush in Europe died, and they had to start the industry from scratch. Interestingly enough, they used stock from America that was resistant to phylloxera, and so all of the grapes grown in Europe are grown on rootstock from Florida. But not Georgia. And I don't really have an explanation for this, why Georgia was never infected with phylloxera. I guess it's remote enough, far enough away from Europe that it never got this fungal disease. To this day, the Georgians propagate grapes just by, it's called vegetal propagation, and they just take the tips of a grapevine and stick it in the ground, and up grows another grapevine, and then they just cut it off and they move it. And like this is unthinkable anywhere else other than Georgia. So I'm kind of a historian of tea, Georgia. I think it's fair to say that nobody in the United States knows more about the tea industry in Georgia than I do, and I'm actually drinking tea from Georgia right now. But I'll say that Georgians don't drink tea, they drink wine, and they drink wine with every meal. It's a part of the Georgian mindset. It's a part of the Georgian table. The Georgians are convinced that they invented wine, and they very well might have. Anyway, three ingredients, three foodstuffs: grapes, corn, maize, and walnuts that define Georgian culinary experience. Sorry, I'll stop. Talk for hours.
Please keep talking, Mike.
A little bit on that. I was actually 2014, I think, as well, when I first visited Georgia and went to visit with Gela, in fact. And I remember I had a very limited time window in which to do that, and I decided that, you know, coming from an understanding that Georgian food was, you know, something that everybody loves, and I need to explain this a little bit to those who perhaps have not spent time in our region. Students, of Russian who go abroad, spend some time in, whether it's Russia, Ukraine, I mean, this probably extends to much of the region, in Europe, will experience Georgian food. It's a celebration meal that inevitably will arrange for a group, or they'll find it on their own. Even back in 1990, when I studied, that was the food you sought out. You know, everybody knew where the Georgian restaurants were. So it's very cult-like. You know, we'll post something about Georgian food on our Facebook page, and it's by far like the most clicked posting that that we can ever post up there. I mean, it's almost cult-like in its following. So I immediately told Gela, when I had this very limited, and there's a cookbook, very limited amount of time to go to Georgia. I was like, I don't need to sleep. I have 48 hours. Sleep does not need to fit into this. Eating does. And if all we do for 48 hours is eat, then I am fine. I can forfeit the sleep part of it. And that's to the credit of Georgian food. And I think that's I would say the introduction that most have to Georgia, that are coming from Russian studies. It's the sampling of the food. It's the fascination with it. Those parts of Georgian culture that we've talked about, a lot of restaurants in, say, Georgia or Ukraine try to replicate that. It's experiential. It's not about just going into some little quick food place to get a bite to eat. It's about buying into a whole experience. It's very elaborately decorated restaurants, usually live music playing to the point where you almost can't have a conversation with anybody because it's deafening at times. So you definitely would not hold any business meetings in which you need to have a serious conversation there. And so and I think this all ties back, this whole food discussion, to this question of geography and isolation. Why is this food not known to us? even though in this era of healthy vegan vegetarianism, we're missing such a big part of the world's menu in that way. And then, so I think at this point, it's not going to spread that quickly, and it's an incentive for all of us to carve out some time to spend it in Georgia. I'm already thinking ahead to inviting a few people to go visit.
I just have to assert that the food that you get in Russia, Ukraine, and Poland in Georgian restaurants, it's good. Everybody should go and love it and all that. Or in America, we have a few Georgian restaurants in Washington, D.C. and New York, but it has nothing in. It is only roughly in common with Georgian food, like, right, with that you eat in Georgia, at a supra, at a roadside restaurant, in somebody's house. It's just you can't compare. I eat. There's a very good Georgian restaurant right up the street from NovaMova in Kiev, and it's made by all Georgian chefs, but it's not nearly as good. Nowhere near. So that experience of like, gosh, I really wish I weren't so full so I could eat some more food. That's that's the constant experience in Georgia. And then they bring you more dishes and you discover that you can eat a little bit more.
Yep.
Yeah, but I would say that food is, it's not that well known, but this is the most well known part of Georgian culture abroad, because every student I've talked to, everywhere in the world where they see a Georgian restaurant, they would like to go and try Georgian food. Because, yeah, as you said, it's unique. And many people really love it. But again, there are other things about Georgia which you discover along the way.
It's the best I can do.
It's called, Michael, product placement.
Product placement, right? Exactly. Just like,
yeah.
Click the link down below.
Make your purchase now. Exactly.
Yeah, I would like, because each time I travel with groups for like 2-3 weeks, we spend time talking a lot, discussing things. And for most Americans, Georgia is so different to any other place they've been to before, in many respects. And this is really important, that people come and they discover so many facets of the Georgian life, not just food and wine, but a lot of history, culture, people, music. As you said, Georgian music is totally dances. So I would say that Georgia is small, but there are so many unique things concentrated in the country. So it might be the most in per capita density of uniqueness might be one of the highest in the world.
Spoken like a Georgian, by the way. All right, I have to go. I have to go to talk to a student who's actually in Bishkek right now. But this has been a great conversation. Thank you for organizing it, Renee. Why don't you say a few words about the programs that SRAS has on offer for Georgia? I know it's the COVID world right now, but it's all going to be okay. So talk to us a little bit about the sorts of opportunities that students might have.
I would say our flagship program would be the Policy and Conflict in the Post-Soviet Space. This has been running now for several years. I've lost track of how many years now, but it's really an amazing opportunity for students to experience not only Georgia, but Azerbaijan, Armenia, Moldova, Ukraine. We would bring them up to Russia for a week or so as well to kind of look at these questions from a Russian perspective. And it's a fantastic opportunity to study the hot and cold conflicts, mostly just sort of percolating conflicts in the region, and the identities that are involved in these conflicts, and to really experience it on the ground. So that's really been I think a growing program. It does incorporate study of Russian language, but it's really got a lot of subject matter that's relevant for a wide number of students. We've run a few times now a foodways program that's bringing students there to study specifically the food. I think going forward, we're going to look a lot more at really tailoring faculty-led programming, whether this is in areas of foodways, environmental studies, tourism. There's a lot of subject matter here that I'd like to encourage. The challenge is that most faculty leaders, of course, tend to gravitate towards a region that they know, and it's difficult to sort of subject somebody to a new territory. But But I can guarantee that this is an area where anybody will feel comfortable in it and be learning as along with the students as well. And this is a fascinating, very intensive experience. As Gela points out, it's a lot of things all in a compact space that makes for a very intensive experience. And in that way can just highlight these issues of identity, geography, and many other areas. Gela, you want to say a few more words about some of the programs you've run there as well for groups?
I would like to stress the programs for the faculty we ran last summer and the year before. And one more thing I would like to mention, that Georgia has been very, as far as COVID-19 is concerned, unlike many other countries, Georgia has been very successful in this respect.
Isolation is good.
Isolation, yeah, exactly.
So far it's like less than 800 cases in whole of Georgia, and it's one of the most successful stories in Europe, by the way.
It's also a very healthy country. Let's point out that this diet has led to a very healthy population, so better equipped to fight these things. Yeah.
I would like to say that whatever students' interests are or fields of study, we always try to find something really interesting for them. And as I said, the last faculty group we had last summer, it was to Heterogeneity, and it's a mountainous region, and it's very far from the capital, and very few people make it there because of the mountains, because of the road. But then you get to see the villages built in the Middle Ages, right on the border with Russia, with Dagestan or Chechnya. You get to see these places, and you see you see totally different culture from the culture you experience in the south or in the east, because Georgians themselves, there are several ethnic sub-ethnicities, Georgian sub-ethnicities, and language varies and mentality varies. So, and then if you come to Georgia, you cannot discover a country just in 1 week or 2 weeks. You have to come back again and again to see different parts of the country and study something really unique about this particular part of Georgia. So I would like to stress, to add that our conflictology programs and identity programs have been very successful. And each time you talk to the students, you see that, like, well, eye-opening, mind-boggling. This is something they don't expect, because they expect good food, good wine, and conflicts. Some history of conflicts, I would say. But then they get to know very different facets of life in Georgia. And this is really valuable about this experience. Something that you experience firsthand and something unexpected. So this is my view.
Excellent.
All right.
So
everyone's invited to Georgia. So whatever your interests are.
Okay, thanks. I have to run. That was a great conversation about Georgia, and we'll fill it in with with some photographs and some movie clips and some interviews. But this is just as it is, just without any processing and without any editing. I think it'll work great. So thank you very much for all coming together. I'm going to turn off the recording.